So one of the tools that was made available to this effort, and specifically to the stakeholders, is something called Marine Map. This was really a pretty exciting thing. It's a computer-based mapping system that all of the stakeholders had access to, where the information about the coast in terms of the habitats, where the habitats are, coastal resources, coastal access points, fishing data, where people like to fish. I'm just going to zip through this. All of that information was available on a website. So all of the stakeholders could have access to the same information. Well, where are the kelp forests? If we're supposed to be including kelp forests in marine protected areas, where are the kelp forests? How do we know? If we're trying to avoid impacting fishermen and maybe not put the marine protected area in their very favorite fishing ground, how do we know what that is? You know, you can ask the fisherman, he's sitting there and he'll tell you. But one thing we saw was, sometimes the fisherman will tell you that's his favorite area. And so you say, well, okay, well, what about over here? Well, that's also his favorite area. It can get a little circular. So having a way to capture the information, the data, and share it amongst all of the stakeholders, all of the people who are trying to work together to devise these marine protected areas was really a valuable tool. In many cases, the fishermen know the ocean very well, and some of the other folks maybe not so much. The conservationists may care about the ocean and want to see it protected, but not have that same kind of day-to-day knowledge that a fisherman who spends his life out on the water does. So having a way to share that information as you're trying to do the marine protected area design proves really important. Here's an example down in Southern California. Again, the red area is a proposed marine reserve, and the blue is a conservation area where some fishing would be allowed. So you can draw that on the map, right? Here's the marine protected area that we are proposing. And then you can look at the data and see the red areas on this map show hard bottom, rocky bottom habitat. The blue shows sand, so you get a sense, well, what kind of habitats are you protecting? The green close to shore is kelp forest. Again, you want to include some kelp forest. Well, how good are we doing at that? And then the little icons where the fish are access areas, fishing access areas. The kayaks show areas that kayak fishermen have said are most important to them. So you can put all this information together on a map, and it really provides a useful tool to try to figure out where should we put these marine protected areas as we try to do this delicate balance of including the habitats following scientific guidelines, but also hopefully being aware of how people use the ocean today and making sure that kayak fishermen will still have places to fish that they like to fish, even as we're designing marine protected areas. So, in my view, this is a pretty good example of a well-designed marine protected area. You've got the point, you've got some kelp, you've got the submarine canyon where that pink is underneath the red marine protected area, and yet you can see there's also plenty of kelp and plenty of area that the kayak fishermen like to use that remain outside of the marine protected areas. Then at the end, once you've designed all of these different individual marine protected areas, the tool also allowed you to run the sort of cumulative information and see, well, as you design multiple marine protected areas for a region, how well does that network do? What percentage of different habitats have you included within it? What are the predicted impacts to fishermen? So again, really a valuable way to assess, how good are we doing, both on the science side, but also hopefully on avoiding some of the economic or social impacts. So at the end of the day, what we have seen, in each region is a pretty big change from what was the protected areas that were pre-Marine Life Protection Act to what has been designed under this effort. I'm not going to show you all of them for the whole state, but here's an example from the Central Coast. Again, we had some marine protected areas pre-MLPA, that's shown on the left, but pretty ad hoc, mostly very small, and in many cases, like those big blue ones on the bottom, those were areas where the only species that was protected in those 4 areas to I've only seen 3 of them, were clams. So you can fish for anything except for clams. Not really ecosystem protection, right? So on the right, we see what has been adopted and is in place now for the Central Coast. We know that in general, the public supports the idea of marine protected areas. Polling's been done multiple times in various national polls here in California, local polls. And when you ask people just that basic question, does it make sense to put aside a relatively small proportion of the ocean and just leave it alone and protect it? They say yes, right? This is sort of a no-brainer. People get this. It's a simple idea to leave nature alone in some areas. So it doesn't take a whole lot of scientific explanation of the benefits of marine protected areas and how fish reproduce and bigger fish make more babies. You don't have to go there. You can ask them a very simple question and most people will say, yes, that makes sense to me. The pollsters that we've worked with pointed out that you can't get 75% of Californians to say yes to anything. They don't agree on anything. So the numbers that you see for support here, I mean, significantly, they polled on oil drilling, and the numbers were, 52-48. So that's kind of an interesting point. That surprised me, right? And it's getting, of course, it fluctuates with gas prices. People seem to be more willing to accept oil drilling off the California coast, depending on what they're paying to fuel up their car. But the basic support, superficial, right? It's a simple question without a lot of background, but the basic support is pretty high amongst the public. And what we've seen around the state of California, a little sleepy, there we go, has been really strong support throughout the state. Everywhere we've been trying to work for these marine protected areas, try to help establish them, the public has come out and been very vocal and very forceful. So we've seen everything from school children to retirees coming to these meetings and hearings, meeting after meeting. Like I said, some of the venues in Southern California, we had 600-800 people showing up. We had a meeting in San Diego last year where literally the fire marshal, shut the door. People had to stay outside. If you went to the restroom, you lost your seat and you couldn't get back in the room. So it's an issue that has generated a lot of interest throughout the state. And I think that's